Welcome. The title of this lecture is The Rise of New France. Samuel de Champlain did it all. He was a soldier, navigator, cartographer, and colonial leader. His physical courage was undeniable. He sailed across the ocean more than 20 times, fought battles in Europe and against hostile natives in North America, and shot dangerous rapids in a canoe despite not knowing how to swim. However, his greatest achievement was his steady and visionary leadership of the French colony on the St. Lawrence River. Champlain is rightly understood as the founder of Quebec. When he died in 1635, there was a good foundation on which others could build a strong colony. In the early 1600s, after decades of lost interest, the French renewed their attention on Canada. Certainly, profitable fishing on the Atlantic coast was no secret, and the fishery integrated North America into the European-dominated economic system. But more important to the French was the budding market for furs, particularly beaver furs. Rich merchants and court aristocrats desired beaver hats. To expand the fur trade and defend its claim to Canada, France set out to build a settlement. The method was to establish a monopoly that gave the holder of the monopoly the sole right to trade in an area. In return, the merchant or company was obligated to foot the bill of building a settlement. Born in 1570 and baptized as a Protestant, Samuel de Champlain became a Roman Catholic. As a young soldier, he demonstrated his courage in fierce battles against Spanish troops. Rewarded, he became an aide to a regional commander. Champlain's uncle, who was a naval officer and wealthy landowner in both France and Spain, permitted Champlain to join a Spanish expedition to New Spain. This was a rare opportunity for a Frenchman, and Champlain saw Venezuela, Mexico, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. Soon after returning to Spain in 1601, Champlain received wealth when his uncle died and left him the estate's assets. When he returned to France, he went to the royal court and showed King Henry IV his writings and maps of Spanish possessions. Champlain became one of the king's geographers. King Henry wanted to see the establishment of a colony in New France, and Champlain received the position deputy commander of the expedition to New France. In 1603, the French dropped anchor in late May at the mouth of the Saguenay. They met with Montagnais natives who were in the process of torturing Iroquois prisoners captured in a recent battle. The Iroquois people who had lived in the region 70 years earlier during Jacques Cartier's time on the St. Lawrence had been pushed out by stronger natives. Champlain explored the St. Lawrence River region and the Gaspé, and when he returned to France, he presented reports that stimulated support for trade and colonization. King Henry granted Pierre de Sieur de Mont a 10-year monopoly of the fur trade in Acadia. De Mont was a wealthy Protestant nobleman and loyalist to the king. In return for the monopoly, De Mont was to take 60 settlers to Acadia every year and encourage evangelism of the natives. The boundaries of Acadia were large. The eastern seaboard stretched from present-day New Jersey to Cape Breton Island. In 1604, De Mont and Champlain sailed to Acadia with 80 colonists. The first settlement site, selected by Champlain, was on the tiny island of St. Croix Island in the Bay of Fundy, close to present-day St. Andrews, New Brunswick. The first winter was a disaster, and 35 settlers died of scurvy. The French relocated to a site on the other side of the Bay of Fundy near today's Annapolis Royal. Port Royal was a better site for settlement, but in 1607, despite 2 years of encouraging signs of satisfactory conditions for the settlers, French leaders counseled de Mont's Acadia monopoly. Opponents of Acadia pointed out that Port Royal was too far from the richest regions of fur. Moreover, it was easier for competitors to ignore the monopoly and trade furs illegally in the St. Lawrence River region. De Monts turned his attention to the St. Lawrence River, which was easily reached from the sea. Cutting deep into the continent, the river offered excellent access to furs. The Saguenay, the St. Maurice, and the Ottawa were 3 rivers of many that drained into the St. Lawrence. The St. Lawrence link to the Great Lake region was also valuable. It was Samuel de Champlain, serving as the leader of the expedition, who oversaw the building of Quebec in 1608. The site chosen on the St. Lawrence River was at a narrow point near a towering cliff. The main construction were wooden buildings surrounded by a stockade. The Algonquin word for narrow passage was Quebec. Thus, the French settlement was called Quebec. To develop the fur trade, Champlain established good relations with the natives, who valued French wares such as metal awls, needles, iron arrowheads, metal kettles, knives, iron hatchet, cloth, and beads. There were numerous violent confrontations with the enemies of the Huron. In 1609, for example, the French traveled with a group of Algonquins and Hurons along the Richelieu River that led to Lake Champlain, where they met a party of Mohawk Iroquois warriors with whom they battled. Champlain expanded the fur trade and built strong alliances with the Algonquins, but there was increasing conflict with the Iroquois, who allied with the Dutch and later the English. In 1615, Champlain explored the Ottawa River and Lake Huron region, where the Hurons lived. Returning to Quebec by a series of rivers and Lake Ontario, Champlain had another confrontation with the Iroquois. Assisted by Huron allies, the French attacked an Iroquois fort and killed several Indians. It was a costly conflict for Champlain, who was wounded and unable to return to Quebec until the following year. Relations between the French and the Iroquois continued to be bitter into the next century. At this time, there were less than 100 settlers located near the Quebec trading post. To maintain such a large area, young Frenchmen were sent out to live and learn from the natives. The Coureurs de Bois, translated runners of the woods, reinforced the political and economic alliances with native allies. The Company of 100 Associates, the new monopoly formed in 1628, was also expected to encourage settlement and missionary ventures. With the shifting politics of the French court and temporary withdrawal of royal favor, Champlain often faced challenges in securing adequate support for his vision of Quebec. With the colony itself, there were periods of decline when Champlain was absent, incidents of violence, and even a minor mutiny, as was the case in the first year of the Quebec settlement. However, Champlain had the necessary diplomatic skills to improve broken relations, whether they were aristocrats in France, New France settlers, or natives. His published writings also offer sophisticated arguments for North American colonization. One other challenge that took place in the late 1620s. In 1628, British privateers, specifically the Kirk Brothers, attacked 4 French ships en route to New France with 400 settlers. One reason for poor British-French relations was the anti-Protestant actions of King Louis XIII and Cardinal Richelieu, a powerful political figure. The Kirk privateers, heavily armed, proceeded to attack Quebec. Without no supplies reaching Quebec, it was a desperate winter. Displaying his customary courage, Champlain showed steady leadership and shared the last of the food rations with the settlers. In 1629, he surrendered to the British forces, that is, to the Kirk Brothers. The French did not regain control until the signing of a peace treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, and that was in 1632. The Jesuits were given complete control of missionary responsibilities. From the start, fur traders and the Jesuits were on poor terms with each other. The Jesuits scolded the immoral behavior of fur traders when they gave natives alcohol, whereas many fur traders viewed the priests as meddlers. Champlain clarified the official French position. The priests were there to stay, and they should be accorded respect. It was also commendable that 1634 saw the arrival of the first French colonists since 1617. The immigrant groups consisted of skilled artisans and family groups. When Champlain died in 1635, Quebec had a small population, but there were signs of hope. Although there was only modest progress in the 1640s, New France experienced steady population growth in the 1650s, despite numerous Iroquois attacks. In 1651, there were approximately 1,000 settlers, and 10 years later, the population had tripled. Settlers adapted to their new environment. They understood the importance of being armed when they went out to their fields. They also organized militia units and adopted the same guerrilla tactics of their Indian enemies. The development of New France received a huge boost when King Louis XIV came to power in 1661. Louis ruled France with absolute power, relying on a bureaucracy of approximately 1,000. The state became involved in all the main activities and functions of society. Louis was determined to make New France a province of France, a colony directly under his personal rule. The company monopoly arrangement was replaced by a royal colony. The establishment of a royal government in Quebec was simply one part of an ambitious plan which sought to recover and integrate scattered French possessions in the Western Hemisphere. New France was to be an extension of the system prevailing in France: feudal tenure of land, merchant commerce, and a feudal absolutist monarchy. The feudal system was a system of economic, political, and social organization based on the holding of land. Under the seigneurial system, New France was granted by the king to a vassal or a trading company who granted it to seigneurs. The seigneurs assigned plots of land to feudal tenants known as censitaires. The seigneurs did not have outright ownership of the land. The king was the true owner, and thus the state promoted a paternalistic concept of society. There was the notion of protecting the weak, but the state ensured respect for the privileges of the aristocracy. The seigneurial system was a system of feudal exploitation. The seigneur had the right to appropriate unpaid labor of the censitaire. The censitaire was also to surrender part of his crop, feudal dues, and fees for milling rights. Familiar with this system in France, French men and women were willing to try their hand in New France, and within the first decade of the royal colony, the population increased from about 3,000 to 7,000. Those who came were also known as the king's girls. In this governing class, the leaders were chosen by the crown without the interference of popular assemblies. The principal minister in charge of New France was the Minister of Marine, Jean-Baptiste Colbert. Colbert relayed instructions to the Governor General and the Entente. Communication was a problem, though, as letters were often outdated since they took as long as a year to be delivered. This is, of course, because there was mail once a year. Colbert's administrative mercantilist policy sought to increase the raw revenues by securing a favorable balance of trade. With mercantilism, the colony was expected to benefit the treasury and not be a drag on it. All manufactured goods that were needed in New France were purchased from France. Much of the profits from exports went to France. As part of his policy of building a self-sufficient mercantile empire, Colbert strove to promote a three-way trading system between New France, the French West Indies, and France. Fish, wheat, and other items would go to France and the French West Indies, and sugar and rum from the West Indies would return to New France. Colbert desired to create a compact colony that was contained in the St. Lawrence River Valley. The Governor General oversaw military and diplomatic affairs, which included affairs with Indians. The Entente acted as a manager of the colony. He controlled law and order, prices, financial matters, and industry and trade. The bishop, the religious and moral leader and member of the Sovereign Council, was a very influential man. The Sovereign Council was the governor, intendant, bishop, and 5 councillors. They met on a regular basis and discussed the legal functions of the colony. The captain of the militia functioned in both a military and administrative capacity. Colbert's policy had limited success. The economy in New France did improve some, but it could not be counted on to provide a regular source of exports. New England wheat and fish sold cheaper. The fishing industry was set back because there was no salt works in the colony. Shipbuilding ventures proved to be too expensive because labor costs were too high and there was no local source of iron development. Overseas trade was hampered by seasonal ports, hurricanes, and enemy warships. Despite these weaknesses, all was not negative. The problem was largely the economic system that few challenged before the economic arguments of Adam Smith 100 years later. Mercantilism was an economically inefficient system everywhere. However, greater royal support for New France did encourage immigration. It was a psychological boost. French men and women arrived, and there was steady agriculture expansion. The colony became more than a fur trade outpost. To conclude, due to the efforts of Samuel de Champlain, the colony in the 1660s was firmly established and would last. Historian John Reed sums up Champlain's remarkable impact. His long career as a colonizer, much of it spent in leadership roles, spanned many diverse kinds of colonial experience. colonization as a marginal extension of commerce, colonization aimed at carving out a resource-rich territorial sphere of influence, colonization by family groups with a view to population growth, colonization as a basis for religious conversion. Champlain's vision that New France could become an important asset for France had not died. Thank you.